I tell you, I can't relax, you know. The other night I was in a place I felt like having a few drinks. Someone ordered a bartender. I said, surprise me. He showed me a naked picture of my wife. Tell you the truth, and my wife and I, we never have sex. Now, we get undressed, we can't stop laughing, you know. I got no sex life. 10 years ago, my wife put me on hold. My old man, he didn't help at all, my old man. We used to play tag, and he'd drive. I mean, it's not easy being me. When I was born, the doctor told my mother I did all I could, but he pulled through anyway. I mean, and nobody was nice. My mother never breastfed me. She told me she liked me as a friend. But when I was born, after the doctor cut the cord, he hung himself. And I tell you, I can't relax, you know. My dog drives me nuts. My dog. He wants me to have mate him. I wouldn't mate him. Let him go through what I go through. I mean, last week was rough. Are you kidding? Last week I looked up my family tree. 2 dogs were using it. I'll tell you, my wife isn't too smart, you know. One night she went out, some guy stole the car. I took her to see what he looked like. She told me she got the license plate number.
Thank you. It's Friday, Aristotle Friday, June the 30th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Armstrong and Getty, Matt-Walsh, you decide between Newsmax and ABC News, Terrence K. Williams, Charles-Payne, Sébastien Gorka, No Free Lunch, The Rape of the Mind, and Chapter 3 of Aristotle for Everybody. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
To understand our civilization, one must appreciate that the extended order resulted not from human design or intention, but spontaneously. It arose from unintentionally conforming to certain traditional and largely moral practices, many of which men tend to dislike, whose significance they usually fail to understand, whose validity they cannot prove, and which have nonetheless fairly rapidly spread by means of an evolutionary selection the comparative increase of population and wealth of those groups that happen to follow them. F.A. Hayek. This is human action at its finest and its fullest, man acting in freedom and individuality, but out of the miracle of God's created order, seeing civilization formed. Understanding but then appreciating the dynamic of human action as both spontaneous in its individual expressions, but the source of order in its collective result is critical in understanding economics.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. So who is the true conservative? He is the person that has the courage of his convictions and is confident in what he knows. He is the person that understands that culture trumps politics. He's not selfish, but minds his own business. He does not go looking for trouble. He is alert. He curbs his curiosity, and he acts like an adult. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He is judgmental and moralizes. He refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why, rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American, and he is better than the socialist. He's a better friend, father, brother, family member, and a better person, period. You have to know that being a true conservative is best, or you are wasting your time. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now this is a retweet from Dr. Sébastien Gorka.
Several weeks ago, in a vote to allow trans students to use whatever bathroom they wish, you assured us that these policies were perfectly safe, as neither yourself nor law enforcement could provide a single example of any trans student assaulting any girl in any bathroom, in any school, in any state, anywhere at all, in fact. But not to worry, since you couldn't locate them, I took the trouble too. See, Loudoun County, Virginia, where last year, under district policy, a trans student was allowed into the women's bathroom where he assaulted a girl. To cover it up, they moved him to another school where he did it again. See, Irvine, California last month, where a trans student entered the women's locker room and flashed the girls there. When they confronted him, he mercilessly beat them. This happened again in Gwinnett County, Georgia. This happened again in Oklahoma City. This happened again in Ohio, where a trans man was allowed to use the locker room where he was arrested for flashing little girls. The judge dropped the charges after he ruled that this man was too fat for them to see anything. Last month, in this city, a man using they-them pronouns in a scene straight out of Silence of the Lambs hunted down and killed a female jogger because he, quote, wanted to look just like her. And before you say that these are anecdotal evidence, just note that in a survey of trans inmates in federal prisons, half were convicted of sexual assault and 90% were convicted of violent crimes, well above the general prison population. Now, it should also be noted that in each of these cases, each of these perpetrators had either changed their pronouns, had undergone transition, or had received gender-affirming therapy and accommodations thereof. Why is this important to note? Probably for the same reason we recognize as a society that you do not affirm that people with anorexia can be healthy in any way. You do not affirm that somebody with schizophrenia is hearing voices. And you do not affirm that somebody in a manic episode is having great ideas. Because when you leave somebody to languish in their false mental state, i.e. men who think they are women, they will inevitably lash out and harm themselves and those around them. Hurt people hurt other people. But I don't want to pretend and have the hubris to think that I'm going to be the one to change your mind. I'm happy to share any and all of these examples with you. But you will most likely leave here tonight believing that men can become women, affirming care works, and that you made the right vote. But you will no longer be able to look into the eyes of your constituents and honestly say that you are unaware of the assaults that inevitably take place when we declare to women, you have no right to privacy. Thank you.
And that was, again, a retweet of Dr. Sébastien Gorka. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Chapter 3 of Aristotle for Everybody, Difficult Thought Made Easy by Mortimer J. Adler.
Chapter 3. Man's Three Dimensions. Regarding ourselves simply as bodies or merely as physical things, I would say that our three dimensions, like the three dimensions of any other body, are length, breadth, and height. That is the way in which any body occupies space. While as bodies we are physical things, like all other bodies, we are, as we have just seen, the special kind of thing, the only kind of thing that is called a person. What are our three dimensions as persons, not just as bodies? In space, a dimension is a direction in which I can move. I can move my hand from left to right, from front to back, from up to down. Like spatial dimensions, personal dimensions are also directions in which I, as a person, can act as a human being. I'm sure that we have only three dimensions as physical bodies, but I cannot be as sure that we have only three dimensions as active human beings. Only three directions in which our activities can take us. However, I think that the three dimensions I shall name represent three very important directions that human activity can take. There may be others, but I doubt if there are any as important as these. The three are making, doing, and knowing. In the first of these three dimensions, making, we have man the artist or artisan, the producer of all sorts of things: shoes, ships, and houses, books, music, and paintings. It is not just when human beings produce statues or paintings that we should call them artists. That is much too restricted a use of the word art. Anything in the world that is artificial rather than natural is a work of art, something man-made. In the second of these dimensions, doing, we have man the moral and social being, someone who can do right or wrong, someone who, by what he or she does or does not do, either achieves happiness or fails to achieve it. Someone who finds it necessary to associate with other human beings in order to do what, as a human being, he or she feels impelled to do. In the third dimension, knowing, we have man as learner, acquiring knowledge of all sorts, not only about nature, not only about the society of which human beings are a part, not only about human nature, but also about knowledge itself. In all three of these dimensions, man is a thinker, but the kind of thinking he does in order to make things differs from the kind of thinking he does in order to act morally and socially. Both kinds of thinking differ from the kind of thinking a human being does in order just to know just for the sake of knowing. Aristotle was very much concerned with the differences that distinguish these three kinds of thinking. He used the term productive thinking to describe the kind of thinking that man engages in as a maker. Practical thinking to describe the kind that he engages in as a doer, and speculative or theoretical thinking to describe the kind he engages in as a knower. This threefold division of the kinds of thinking can be found in Aristotle's books. Some of them, such as his books on moral and political philosophy, are concerned with practical thinking and with man as a doer, as an individual living his own life and trying to make it as good as possible, and also as a member of society associated with other human beings and cooperating with them. Some of these books, such as the ones on natural philosophy, are concerned with theoretical thinking about the whole physical world, including man as a part of that world, and man's mind and knowledge as well. He wrote a treatise about man as a maker, but that book deals only with man as a maker of poetry, music, and painting. He entitled it Poetics, because the Greek word from which we get the word poetry means making anything, not just the kind of objects that entertain us and that give us pleasure when we enjoy them. Men and women produce an extraordinary variety of useful things we use in our daily lives, such as the clothes we wear, the houses we live in, the furniture in those houses, and the implements needed to make such things. The more general treatment of man as a maker, particularly man as a maker of useful physical things, we find in the books that Aristotle wrote about nature, his books of natural philosophy. In his effort to understand the phenomena of nature, Aristotle frequently resorted to comparisons between the way men produce things and the way nature works. His understanding of what is involved in human making helped him, and it will help us, to understand the workings of nature. That is why I'm going to begin, in part 2 of this book, with making as a dimension of human activity. After that, in part 3, I'm going to deal with the dimension of human activity in which man is a moral and social being. And finally, in part 4, I will come to man as a knower, postponing to the last the most difficult questions that we have to consider. Questions about the human mind and knowledge itself. The most challenging words in anyone's vocabulary are 3 words that name the universal values that elicit respect and evoke wonder. They are truth, goodness, and beauty, or the true, the good, and the beautiful. These 3 values pertain to the 3 dimensions of human activity. In the sphere of making, we are concerned with beauty, or, to say the least, with trying to produce things that are well made. In the sphere of doing, as individuals and as members of society, we are concerned with good and evil, right and wrong. In the sphere of knowing, we are concerned with truth.
And that was Chapter 3 of Aristotle for Everybody, Difficult Thought Made Easy by Mortimer J. Adler. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
The battle on 2 fronts. The inner harmony between social adaptation and self-assertion has to be reformed in every new environment. Each individual has to fight over and over again the same subtle battle that started during infancy and babyhood. The ego, the self, forms itself through confrontation with reality. Compliance battles with originality, dependence with independence, outer discipline with inner morale. No culture can escape this inner human battle, though there is a difference in emphasis in every culture and society and in every family. The combination of internal and external struggle, of a mental conflict on 2 fronts, renders the Western ideal of an individualized democracy highly vulnerable, particularly when its adherents are unaware of its inherent contradiction. Democracy, by its very nature, will always have to fight against dictatorship from without and destructiveness from within. Democratic freedom has to battle against both the individual's inner will to power and his urge to submit to other people. It also has to battle against the contagious drive for power intruding from over the frontiers and so often backed up by armies. The freedom toward which democracy strives is not the romantic freedom of adolescent dreams. It is one of mature stature. Democracy insists on sacrifices which are necessary to maintain freedom. It tries to combat the fears that attack men when they are faced with democracy's apparently unlimited freedom. Such lack of limitations can be misused to satisfy mere instinctual drives. However, because democracy does not exploit man by myth, primitive magic, mass hypnotism, or other psychological means of seduction, it is less fascinating to the immature individual than is dictatorial control. Democracy, when it is not involved in a dramatic struggle for survival, may appear quite drab and uninspiring. It simply demands that men shall think and judge for themselves, that each individual shall exercise his full conscious ability in adapting to a changing world, and that genuine public opinion shall mold the laws that govern the community. Essentially, democracy means the right to develop yourself and not be developed by others. Yet this right, like every other, has to be balanced by a duty. The right to develop yourself is impossible without the duty of giving your energy and attention to the development of others. Democracy is rooted not only in the personal rights of the common man, but even more in the personal interests and responsibilities of the common man. When he loses this interest in politics and government, he helps to pave the road to power politics. Democracy demands mental activity of a rather high level from the common man. What the general public digests and assimilates in its mind is, in our new era of mass communication, just as important as the dictates of the experts. If the latter formulate and communicate ideas beyond the common grasp, they will talk into a vacuum, Thus, they may permit a more simple and even an untrue ideology to slip in. It is not enough that an idea is only formulated and printed. We have to take care that the public can participate in the new concept. The mystery of freedom is the existence of that great love of freedom. Those who have tasted it will not waver. Man revolts against unfair pressure. While the pressure accumulates, he revolts silently. But at some critical moment, it bursts into open revolt. For those who have lived through such an outburst, freedom is life itself. We have learned this especially in the days of persecution and occupation, in the underground, in the camps, and under the threat of demagoguery. We can even discover in the totalitarian countries where nonetheless the terror, the resistance goes on. Freedom and respect for the individual are rooted in the Old Testament, which convinced man that he makes his own history, that he is responsible for his history. Such freedom implies that a man throws off his inertia, that he does not cling arbitrarily to tradition, that he strives for knowledge and accepts moral responsibility. The fear of freedom is the fear of assuming responsibility. Freedom can never be completely safeguarded by rules and laws. It is as much dependent on the courage, integrity, and responsibility of each of us as it is on the qualities in those who govern. Every trait in us and our leaders which points to passive submission to mere power betrays democratic freedom. In our American system of democratic government, 3 different powerful branches serve to check each other: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. Yet, when there is no will to prevent encroachment of the power of one by any of the others, the system of checks, too, can disintegrate. Like adolescents who try to hide behind the aprons of parental authority rather than face mature adulthood, the individual members of a democratic state may shrink from the mental activity it imposes. They long to take flight into a condition of thoughtless security. Often they would prefer the government or some individual personification of the state to solve their problems for them. It is this desire that makes totalitarians and conformists. Like an infant, the conformist can sleep quietly and transfer all his worries to Father State. When the intellectuals lose their self-control and courage and are possessed only by their fears and emotions, the power of those with prejudice and stupidity gains. Since within each of us lies the seeds of both democracy and totalitarianism, the struggle between the democratic and the totalitarian attitude is fought repeatedly by each individual during his lifetime. His particular view of himself and of his fellow men will determine his political creed. Coexisting with man's wish for liberty and maturity are destructiveness, hate, the desire for power, resistance to independence, and the wish to retreat into irresponsible childhood. Democracy appeals only to the adult side of man. Fascism and totalitarianism tempt his infantile desires. Totalitarianism is based on a mechanized, narrow view of mankind. It denies the complexity of the individual and the struggle between his conscious and unconscious motivations. It denies doubt, ambivalence, and contradiction of feelings. It simplifies man, making him into a machine that can be put to work by governmental oil. In every psychoanalytic treatment, there comes a moment when the patient has to decide whether or not he will grow up. The knowledge and insight he has gained have to be translated into action. By this time, he knows more about himself. His life has become an open book to him. Although he understands himself better, he finds it difficult to leave the dreamland of childhood with its fantasies, hero worship, and happy endings. But, fortified with a deeper understanding of his inner motivation, he steps over into the world of self-chosen responsibility and limited freedom. Because his image of the world is no longer distorted by immature longings, he's now able to function in it as a mature adult. Systematic education toward freedom is possible. Freedom grows as the control over destructive inner drives become internalized and no longer depend on control from the outside, on control by parents and authorities. It is the building up of our personality and our conscience, ego and superego, that is important. Nor can this development be brought about in an enforced and compulsive way as tyrants and dictators try to do. We must develop it through free acceptance or rejection of existing moral values until the inner moral person in us is so strong that he is able to go beyond existing values and can stand on his own moral grounds. The choice in favor of freedom lies between self-chosen limitation, the liberation from chaos, and the pseudo-freedom of unconscious chaos. To many people, Freedom is an emotional concept of letting themselves go, which really means a dictatorship by dark, instinctual drives. There is also an intellectual concept of freedom, meaning a limiting of bondage and unfreedom. In order to become free, certain outside conditions must be prevented from hampering this moral development of self-control. We have to become increasingly aware of the internal dangers of democracy, laxity, laziness, and unawareness. They have to become aware of the fact that mass media and modern communication are able to imprint all kinds of suggestions on our brains. They have to know that education can turn us either into weak fact factories or strong personalities. A free democracy has to fight against mediocrity in order not to be smothered by mere numbers of automatic votes. Democratic freedom requires a highly intelligent appraisal and understanding of the democratic system itself. This very fact makes it difficult for us to advertise or promote it. Furthermore, inculcating democracy is just as dangerous as inculcating totalitarianism. It is the essence of democracy that it must be self-chosen. It cannot be imposed.
And that was The Battle on Two Fronts from The Rape of the Mind by Joost-Meerlo, M.D. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, a little bit of Charles Payne.
Those of America. He used the word fairness about 2 or 3 times in that press conference. How is this fair to bar students who've worked their ass off to get the best grades out there, to sacrifice so many things, and say, no, you don't get it because maybe your family had money? You know, and particularly the Asian kids in this country have been dominated. But this is the best news for black Americans. It can be. It can be. Why? If we allow it, because maybe now we will demand strong educations for our kids beginning in kindergarten, so this kind of thing becomes a moot point. We should never even have to consider things like this if it wasn't for the bigotry of low expectations, mostly by liberal cities that do not think highly of black people. Oh, they like us, but they don't think we're smart. And so the Faustian deal has always been, we'll give you a watered-down education. Your kids will graduate 12th grade with an 8th grade reading level, but we'll make it up to you. We'll give you fair housing. We'll give you food stamps. We'll find a way to make it up. We'll push affirmative action. We'll get you into jobs that you may not necessarily be qualified for. That's the Faustian deal. It's time to end the Faustian deal. I got a lot more on this on my show, by the way.
And that was, again, millionaire Charles Payne on the affirmative action ruling by the Supreme Court. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a little something from Terrence K. Williams.
Let's get something straight. Since y'all want to talk about racism, then let's talk about it. I'm black, as you can see clearly, and I do not need... Listen to the words that are coming out of my mouth. I'm black, and I do not need affirmative action to succeed. And I'm about sick and tired of being sick and tired of hearing these white liberals say, I can't succeed in a merit-based system because I'm black. Who in the heck? You mother... Y'all gonna make me get out of character. Who in the hell do y'all think y'all are? To sit up here and insult, it's insulting to say black people don't know how to make it. They can't succeed on their own. So you think we all dumb? You think we all boo-boo the foo-foo? Huh? So you think all black people are stupid and can't think for themselves and we just not smart? Well, I hate to break the news to you. I don't need affirmative action, and I don't need the government to succeed. Okay? I don't need them at all.
And that was Terrence K. Williams on the affirmative action ruling by the Supreme Court. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, a man in the street being interviewed about his opinion about the Supreme Court's ruling on affirmative action.
Affirmative action. Once the ruling came down, Erica Marsh and all the Democrats ripped their white hoods off. They are saying that black people are stupid, the reason we need affirmative action. You won't be able to accomplish your goals. Everybody can accomplish their goals. It's what your goals are, not what their goals are. And I'm telling you, we've been saying this for the longest. They love segregation. And I'm telling you, folks, we are smart. We are able to do things without people belittling us and talking down to us. And that's what's been happening the last few days since the ruling came down. The Democrats, like I said, they ripped off their hoods and they show who they are really are.
And that was a gentleman, it's from an account called Dr. Interracial, about who the Democrats really are following the Supreme Court's ruling on affirmative action. Back in a minute. Thank you. So I'm listening to Matt Walsh on the radio, and he's talking he went to give a talk, a speech or whatever, and of course he takes questions from the audience. And so somebody was talking about studies, and because Matt Walsh spends a lot of time dealing with transsexual youth in particular, and whether or not children should be transsexualized, for lack of a better term. So anyways, somebody brought up the idea of a study, and he said rightly, I don't need to study. I know common sense. I have common sense. And common sense trumps studies. And so that's good. Where he went wrong was later on in his little statement, he says that you could come up with all the studies in the world. I'm paraphrasing here. You can come up with all the studies in the world, but it wouldn't convince me that child abuse is okay. Now, where he goes wrong here is when he says, convince me. You cannot convince me. You're back to the idea that everything is up for a vote. It's metaphysically, it's a metaphysical mistake. Okay, what you need to do instead is say that child abuse, and child abuse would include forcing your children to become transsexual, but child abuse is wrong. It was wrong yesterday, it's wrong today, it'll be wrong tomorrow. And all the studies in the world will not make it right. That's what he should have said. That's the most powerful statement you can make. And there's a saying in chess, always make your best move. And the best move there is to say it just as I did. Back in a minute. Thank you. So I was listening yesterday to Armstrong and Getty, and I just caught the tail end of their comment about somebody had sent them or called in, probably sent them like an email, saying that they were down on America, that they were hating America. And they sounded frustrated, and they said they were frustrated, and they sounded confused and surprised. And I've made this argument before about right-wing talk radio, or Republican, like I like to call them Republican talk radio, is that they sound like they hate the United States. I have made the case that the left hates the United States because it's too far right, and the right hates the United States because it's too far left. And we have nobody that actually loves the country other than perhaps Donald Trump. And maybe that's why Donald Trump is where he is politically speaking. So, but the thing with Armstrong and Getty, they wouldn't be surprised if they did what I've advocated for years, is that whether you're on television or on radio, the first thing you should do when you finish your broadcast is listen to your broadcast. Listen to it, because if these people listen to their own broadcasts day after day after day, they would realize how depressing they sound, how much that they are depressing and demoralizing their audience. And once they realize that, they wouldn't get criticized, because they say to themselves, you know what, this is depressing, it needs to change, and they would change it without having to be prompted by their audience. Back in a minute. Thank you. And so now today's You Decide is going to be between Newsmax and ABC News on the Supreme Court decision regarding free speech in the case of a web designer who had refused to take on a client or a customer because they wanted they were gay, or they want a gay website made or something, and the owner of this website design business said no for religious reasons. And so first is going to come ABC News and then Newsmax. Each is about 6 minutes long. So first up, ABC News.
Now to the other big ruling that we got this morning, handed down. This is the ruling on free speech case involving a familiar challenge here. The question whether businesses can refuse service to LGBTQ customers because doing so would violate the business owner's First Amendment rights. This was a 6-3 decision. The Supreme Court rules for a Christian web designer who objected to making wedding websites for same-sex couples. And we're going to go back to Devin Dwyer on this one, because, Devin, we've seen cases like this before the court, but this one much more sweeping and broad.
A significant and sweeping decision, and surprising many of us who have covered the court on this issue from some time. You know, the First Amendment prohibits the government from forcing any of us from saying anything we don't want to say. At the same time, civil rights laws in this country say that businesses that are open to the public have to serve everybody. But what the court said today is that businesses in some cases can refuse to serve certain customers if doing so would force them to say something they don't want to say, like a business who designs websites, a stationer, maybe even someone who is landscaping your yard. If that is an expressive, customized, and tailored service, Neil Gorsuch said that the government cannot force you to do that business with someone that you don't want to do business with or something you don't want to say. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who was in the dissent with the three liberal justices, said this is the first time in history, in her words, that the Supreme Court has granted a right to businesses open to the public to refuse to serve a member of a protected class. She says this decision threatens to balkanize the marketplace and even in her view, could allow some businesses to refuse to serve, say, interracial couples simply because if doing so would force the business owner to say something they didn't want to say. So a striking and sweeping opinion. Justice Neil Gorsuch didn't articulate the limiting principle, if you will, for this decision, and so it's certainly going to invite much more litigation down the line.
Devin, as you mentioned, the lack of limits as they're spelled out or not spelled out here raises a lot of questions going forward. It is worth noting that, again, what Sotomayor said in her dissent, she says, in her view, this allows a web designer to refuse to serve interracial couples if such a designer opposed interracial marriage. So, again, raising a lot of questions here going forward. Let's bring back Kate Shaw. And, Kate, legally, what does this mean for businesses and customers?
You know, this really is, I think, an enormous change. Justice Sotomayor, I think, is quite right in her dissent. You know, these public accommodation laws have a lengthy historical pedigree. They've been part of our federal laws for over 70 years, and in most states and localities, there are similar laws. And they just say that if you're a business and you provide goods or services to the public, you can't discriminate. And in recent years, discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and sometimes gender identity has also been prohibited in many places, including in Colorado. And until now, the Supreme Court has never said said that one of those laws violates the First Amendment rights of a business or business owner who wishes to refuse service to some category of customers. So I do think that Devin is exactly right that this case has potentially sweeping ramifications for the ability of business owners under some circumstances to provide services and to the ability of customers, I should say, to receive services on a non-discriminatory basis, in the public square. And it's not something that the Supreme Court has ever blessed. As long as we've had public accommodation laws, there have been objections, sometimes religiously grounded objections, and the court has never sided with those, has always upheld these laws. And so this is a very significant and I think very new rule the court has set forth today.
All right, Kate, thank you. I want to bring back Mary Bruce here because, Mary, now we have two losses as they could be perceived for President Biden. Only so much he can do, but again, a message that he would take to the voters.
Exactly, and we haven't heard yet from the president in response to this case. I suspect he will speak out forcefully against this. Of course, Joe Biden is someone who has spoken passionately about how everyone deserves to be treated equally with dignity and respect, no matter who you love. His administration has already passed new federal protections for same-sex couples, the Respect for Marriage Act. And of course, this is Joe Biden, someone who led a real national political transformation on the issue of same-sex marriage, coming out in 2012, surprising many with his support for same-sex marriage. That was a watershed moment in this country, as you recall, then forcing then President Obama to come out and do the same. But again, this is an issue where this administration, the Biden campaign, is going to hope to mobilize voters, drive them to the polls next November.
Mary, thank you. Let's bring back Terry Moran here because, Terry, we had affirmative action yesterday. We have these cases today. This is another defining moment for the Supreme Court and its conservative majority.
It sure is. And you see how much elections matter, right? Since these three justices appointed by Donald Trump have taken the bench, you've seen how fast and far the court can go. Abortion rights, gone. Affirmative action, gone. Today, a traditional understanding of public accommodation, that if you hold out your business as a public business open to all, you must serve all. The court limiting that today on the basis of free speech rights, and there's more to come. This is clearly a Supreme Court with the bit between its teeth, with the conservative majority not just in charge, but really eager to reach out and accomplish goals the conservative movement has had for decades. We're seeing the impact in law and in life in this country, and they aren't done yet by a long shot.
And two more major decisions at the Supreme Court. Terry Moran, thank you, and our entire team of contributors here. Of course, our coverage continues on ABC News Live and abcnews.com. I'll be right back here with the entire team for World News Tonight. For now, I'm Whit Johnson in New York.
Okay, so there you have the ABC News version, and now, also about 6 minutes, Newsmax.
We want to get back to that Supreme Court ruling. One of two major decisions has already been made and again made public. Again, citing in favor of that Christian website designer, that the state cannot force her or any website designer to make their artistry for same-sex couples should they choose. A 6-3 ruling. I want to bring in Randy Zellin. He is a criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor, also an adjunct professor of law at Cornell University School of Law. Good to see you. Thank you again for picking up. I know we talked to you just moments ago. And here we are with this breaking news again. Can you weigh in on this and what you've read so far?
So much for easing into the holiday weekend, but I think the court did it on purpose. This is one where you really, no matter what side you come down on, you better be wearing a crash helmet. I think what the court basically did was say, listen, and I'll borrow from the cake case. I have to sell you a cake. I don't have to put an inscription on it. And I think what happened here was the court, because remember, in the cake case, the court never really reached the constitutional issue and basically said, you know what, these commissioners who decided the case, they weren't neutral. What they said wasn't cool. And that's why they ruled in favor of the baker. Here, the court stepped out from behind the curtain and actually took a constitutional position and said, listen, by making this person create this web design, we are forcing this person to speak. We are forcing this person to express him or herself, and that is something that we're not going to do. So the court really danced between raindrops on the matter of we're not suggesting discrimination. What we're saying is we're not going to make someone express him or herself in a way that is contrary to his or her religious beliefs.
And Randy, this was a private business of Lori Smith's, this website business here. Can you weigh in on how that's significant when it comes to this ruling?
Yes, because we talk about discriminating against members of the public, and there is a difference between selling into the public and choosing not to sell to the public, because there is a freedom of choice. I can choose not to provide services to members of the public at large. But if I choose to serve members of the public at large, and I choose to allow people to come into my shop, then at that point I am subject to the laws of treating all people fairly and not distinguishing and choosing to whom I do business with based upon the color of his or her skin, the sexual orientation, gender. Those things are frowned upon. But again, here, talk about threading a needle with a microscopic thread. What the court said here, okay, you are doing business with members of the public, but again, we may force you or not allow you not to sell a cake to someone whose sexual orientation you don't agree with, but we're not going to make you celebrate them by writing an inscription that they want you to write on the cake. Here, the web design is the same concept. A web designer is expressing oneself, and the court said by making that person create this web design against their religious belief, we are forcing you to express yourself. We are compelling you to express yourself in creating this design, and that is not what we believe the law was designed to protect against.
All right. Again, 6-3 ruling in favor of that Christian web designer there. The state cannot force her to make, again, a same-sex website. Again, citing First Amendment there. We appreciate it. Randy Zellen, thank you so much, by the way, for answering not once but twice today. We do appreciate that. Now enjoy the weekend, hopefully, for you. We'll bring in Alan Dershowitz here, professor emeritus at Harvard Law, famed constitutional attorney as well, author of several books. Good to see, Professor. Thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate that. We've been watching many of these cases. Again, still awaiting the student loan, the Biden student loan forgiveness decision. But if you can weigh in on this one, if you would, hear the court 6-3 siding with the Christian web designer.
It's a close case, but it's an extremely dangerous decision. Let's just change the facts a little bit. Let's assume that a religious Catholic has a business and won't serve anybody who's divorced. Would the court have come to the same decision? Or what if you have a fundamentalist who says, look, what about the part of the Bible that talks about the curse of against black people? We're not going to integrate with black people because we have a religious belief. The devil can cite scripture. And in the gay rights case, there'll be substantial support by the public, by a lot of people who are bigoted against gay and lesbian people. But the same rule would apply to somebody who refused to serve divorced people. Let's remember, I'm not a theologian, but the argument against divorce in the Bible is much, much stronger in the New Testament, particularly in the Christian religion, than against adultery and against divorce. And so there are so many things in life that people believe are prohibited or required by the Bible. If we permit the religion to become a license for law breaking generally, we're going down a very, very slippery slope. Now, I obviously haven't had a chance to read everything, and I hope there are constraints in the decision, because otherwise it can be a very, very, very dangerous slippery slope, allowing people to claim religious excuses for not integrating, for not doing a range of other activities that the law compels.
All right. Again, there's still a lot to wade through. Again, as you were saying there, with the dissenting opinions, et cetera, and that ruling, a lot to read up on there. But we appreciate that. Again, Professor Alan Dershowitz joining us live.
Okay, so that was the Newsmax version. Now, what we're not getting here from either side is that this is a classic case of the court being asked to do a balancing act and decide between the rights of the individual, in the case of free speech, and the rights of government in the case of affirmative action. And what nobody seemed to figure out is that the government has no rights. Not even the Supreme Court picked up on that. The government has no rights. This is also why it is so important now, the political leanings of judges and justices. Because again, if you're going to be asked to, or you've been brainwashed into believing you're supposed to, make decisions between competing rights of the government versus the rights of the individual, you can see where the politics comes into play. The left is going to want always to have the rights of the government paramount and more important than the rights of the individual, whereas Republican or conservative justices are going to look at things the other way. And in reality, all it should be is simply taking the Supreme Court or the Constitution, applying the facts of the case to it, and making a decision. And that way, it doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, a liberal, or a conservative. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.